Our sermon text this morning is Psalm 34. And we can read that together now. And Psalm 34, of course, is the psalm David wrote after he was rescued from Achish, king of Gath, which we read about earlier. And here in Psalm 34, Achish is named Abimelech, which is a common name for a Philistine king. But it is the same event. And we'll begin reading at verse 1. Psalm 34. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, my children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to blot out their name from the earth. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. He protects all his bones, not one of them will be broken. Evil will slay the wicked, the foes of the righteous will be condemned. The Lord will rescue his servants. No one who takes refuge in him will be condemned. Congregation, in 1957, the government of Canada proclaimed the second Monday of October as Thanksgiving Day. The government said this in the proclamation: "This shall be a day of general thanksgiving to Almighty God for the bountiful harvest with which Canada has been blessed." It's a remarkable proclamation from a country which is no longer so Christian. And on Thanksgiving, we are supposed to, generally speaking and historically, Thanksgiving was a day in which we gave thanks for the bounty of the harvest. But here in Brampton, I don't think any of us harvested a whole lot. A few of us harvested our gardens. But we didn't slave long and hard over our fields, did we? And so Thanksgiving, I think for many of us, feels somewhat odd. I mean, filling our grocery cart at Fortino's is the closest we get to the concept of harvest. And there's something significant about this, particularly in our culture. We no longer work the land to produce food. Food and everything else we possess is produced in giant factories overseas and then shipped in giant ships into other giant warehouses and then given to us in giant stores. All in a quest to provide us with an ever greater abundance. And our economic system has created this astonishing abundance never before seen. In fact, a millennial like me cannot even remember a time when we would have gone to the grocery store and the shelves would not have been full. The great toilet paper shortage of 2020 was the closest thing we ever saw to a shortage, and that didn't really count. Now, of course, our prosperity in itself is not a bad thing. It's lifted millions out of poverty. It's been a great blessing. It's produced a level of health that's never really been achieved before, and that's a good thing. But perhaps a deeper question for us today is, has our prosperity made us into better people in other ways? I'm sure we're often healthier, although that's open to debate given the way we eat. But are we better people because we're richer? Now, many of you would say, how do I even answer that question? I don't really know how I could measure how much better or not I am if I become wealthier. Or perhaps let me suggest to you a measurement. Is my wealth made me more thankful or less? Because theoretically, if I have more wealth, I should be more thankful. But given what I can see, and again, this can be open for debate, it seems that our prosperity, far from making us better, has made us worse if we measure thankfulness. Here we are, a series of generations that may well be the most entitled in human history, although we don't know what the Romans were like. And that's not just the millennials. It's easy to blame my generation because we are entitled. I admit it. But the baby boomers, I would argue, are no less entitled. And there have been significant arguments to suggest that perhaps more. But I'll leave that debate. It's not to answer on the pulpit. And the point is this. The average North American thinks that he deserves what he has. And some of us even think that our wealth has come to us because we've worked so hard to deserve it. We've forgotten the 400 privileges we were given at birth in this country. We'll talk more about that. The point is that Thanksgiving for many of us is what I would call an anachronism. What's an anachronism? It's something that doesn't belong in our age. Something that is conspicuously old-fashioned, that is out of place. Thanksgiving, it seems, belongs to a former era when harvests failed sometimes. And we seem to be past the whole idea of a harvest failing, and so the food just comes, and why would we be thankful for it? Because it's just going to come, and obviously we're always just going to have enough to eat anyway. What's there to be thankful for? Look at what we've achieved. And so we're not really very thankful because we don't think that there's anything to be thankful for. But the problem is that biblically, there's a problem with that. Because the Bible has a lot to say about thankfulness, you see. In fact, in Ephesians 5, verse 1 through 7, there's a passage in which the Apostle Paul talks about all these immoral things that Christians should not do. And then he says, you know what the opposite of all that immorality is? The opposite of that is thankfulness. Thankfulness is the default, in other words, way of being for the Christian soul. In Colossians 2, he says this, he says, just as you received Christ Jesus, continue to live your lives in him, and what? Overflowing in thankfulness. This is a characteristic of the Christian. And so that means that if we are not thankful people, we have a massive problem. Because thankfulness goes down to the very foundations of Christianity, which is why when Canada in former days thought like Christians, they could make a proclamation that said, today we're going to give thanks to Almighty God for the bounty of the harvest. This is something our government said. And so today, on this Thanksgiving Day, I think we ought to challenge ourselves on how thankful we really are. Are we thankful? And why should we be thankful? And in order to challenge us, we're going to turn to Psalm 34. Because Psalm 34, we're going to see the inner life of a thankful man, King David, who in many ways does have something to be thankful for, but in many ways doesn't have anything to be thankful for. And yet he is incredibly thankful, and we're going to walk through the contours of his thankfulness as he sings it in Psalm 34. We'll see our theme, the inner life of a thankful man. We'll first see our first point, thankful for deliverance. Now let's look at Psalm 34. I want to start with verse 4. David says something remarkable. He says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Now, this is not just poetry. God actually rescued him after he cried out to God. And that's what we find in 1 Samuel 21. And we read that earlier. We read about David's rescue from Achish, king of Gath. Psalm 34 is written directly in response to that scene. I want to walk through a little bit of 1 Samuel 21, and we'll begin to see that there's a little bit to this. Right, so if you go to 1 Samuel 21, there's this very curious scene that's hard to interpret apart from Psalm 34. Right, we have verse 10. So David is fleeing from King Saul. King Saul wants his life. King Saul thinks David is a threat to his kingdom. And David is fleeing, and David flees to the neighboring country, the Philistines. So it says that day David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath, his enemy. David had already killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Philistines. And yet now here he is fleeing to the king of all these men that have died. David hopes that Achish will give him shelter or perhaps even employ him. But look what the servants say. Verse 11, the servants of Achish said to him, isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in the dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And so the servants of Achish, they know who David is. David is their enemy's champion. They're like, wait a second. Why is he here? And hold on. If he is who we think he is, we better kill this guy. This guy is our enemy. And frankly, why is he here? Perhaps he's a spy. And I bet you, let's think of it this way. Many of the people in Gath probably had lost a relative to David, because David had defeated many Philistine armies. You can only imagine the kind of treatment that David is going to get in such a place. His decision to go to Gath has been a grievous error in judgment. Though perhaps he had no choice. So David comes up with the remarkable plan. In verse 12, David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. Well, yeah, I'd be terrified too. So he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. He develops this plan in an instant. And here's something I want to take. We're going to get to this. This is not a great plan. This is an extremely risky plan that should not have worked. This plan is, I think in most situations it would have failed. Because there's no reason why they should have maybe not thrown him in a prison cell and waited till his insanity subsided. But astonishingly, we read in verse 14 that it works. Achish said to his servants, look at the man, he's insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you would bring this fellow here? And Achish says, get rid of him. Right? And perhaps they think he's possessed by a demon, in which case they would want to get rid of him. Now, King David writes Psalm 34 in response to this event. There's two things I want to go through here that speak to thankfulness. The first thing I want to go into is David sees God everywhere. And that's what Psalm 34 teaches us. Because when you read the account of 1 Samuel, it looks like David saved himself. Like, why would we see God in this? How can David be so sure that God delivered him when in fact it was David's idea to act like he's insane? And like I said, David's plan was actually very foolish, although perhaps his only available plan. And yet here David writes Psalm 34 and he says, God, thank you for delivering me. God, you delivered me. It's ought to teach us something. Right? In the introduction, I talked about our temptation to be very ungrateful. And one of the reasons we North Americans are so tempted to be ungrateful is because we do not see God in our lives. We think God is far away. We think we earned the money to buy our house or to start our business or to buy our cars. We think we produced healthy children. We think we arrive at our destination safely. We think that we were so smart that we would immigrate to a different country. And it's not to say that we have no skill or that we didn't work hard. But think about David's perspective. He sees God in every single thing he does. And sometimes in his Psalms, he talks about expecting God to act in his life because he's so sure God is near. And the Bible teaches us that God is active in every part of our lives. Look at Matthew 10, verse 29. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. Even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. The number is not very high for some of us. But nonetheless, he knows. And yet, most of us think we control every detail of our lives. We think our health and our wealth is solely due to our own action and initiative. There's something deeply wrong with that. Because in reality, everything we possess comes from God. It was God's decision that we sit in Brampton, in this beautiful suburb, or city perhaps, and not in Kandahar, Afghanistan. Not that he wouldn't bless us if we lived there either, but the point is, God has given us more than we could ever imagine, and sometimes we forget that. I mean, for those of us who are married, for example, how did we find our spouse? Is it because we were so gifted and romantic in dating? Because if getting married depended on skill in dating, I would never have gotten married. God led Lisa into my life and I into hers, and it's so clear that he did that. And for those of us who have children, did our genetics produce such healthy children? Children are like a miracle. The way they come about is nearly impossible to fathom. For those of us who have good jobs, who run businesses, can we really say that we built them through hard work and determination? Maybe we did put that in, and we need to put that in. But at the end of the day, is that really what did it? Think about the advantages of good roads, an educated workforce, of the rule of law so we can have justice so that people don't cheat us in business. There were like 400 things that this country had to give so that someone's business in this country could actually succeed. Never mind just what we would call pure chance or providence. The fact that things just seem to work in a certain way so that our business succeeded or our career succeeded. Or that we could even afford to go to university. And it's funny, I know that we are ungrateful as North Americans because North Americans look down on the poor. North Americans always think that it's the poor's fault that they're poor. The North Americans forget about the advantages that someone has when they're wealthy. And usually a lot of someone's success has to do with the advantages that they were given. Not all of it. And it's not to say that those who are poor are, that there's not some fault in that, whatever, but it doesn't matter. Think of those of us who are born to a good family with two parents and maybe went to a Christian school, who were able to finish education, had socialized medicine so that tetanus and polio didn't kill us. We had police officers that stopped thieves from robbing our house and enslaving our children. In our lives, at every single point and juncture, something could have happened to take absolutely everything from us. And here's the thing, and we're going to get to this. For some of us, that actually happened. And even spiritual things. The decision to come to church. Who brought us here? Were we so brilliant that we would choose a church community? No, God brought you to church. God keeps you here. God comforts your heart in the church. We are not in control. We are completely dependent on a Father who watches even over the birds outside this building. And that is what David gets. You see, when David sings about in thankfulness about God's deliverance, it may not be that he was thankful after the deliverance. It may well be that he was so thankful to God before the deliverance that now it makes perfect sense to sing another song of praise in thankfulness to God. Perhaps God delivered David because David was thankful. Because David designs his life for God to receive the glory, and therefore God does mighty things in his life. Suddenly we realize that the way David sees reality is radically different and radically humble, even in a man with mighty personal skills. And so what we learn about unthankfulness is that unthankfulness is essentially a distortion of reality. A heart that is not thankful is a heart that can't see what's true. It can't see the fact that life without God, we can't expect anything good. The only reason we have good things is because God is constantly active and responding to prayer. And maybe not even our prayers. Maybe it's the prayers of other people are the reason you've gone somewhere in life. I think that's true for my life. I think in particular, there's a great-grandmother who I know prayed for all of her grandchildren with great power every morning. A heart overflowing with thankfulness is a heart that first can see that God is active in every good part of their life. See, we don't come to church on Thanksgiving and say, hey, let's try to be thankful today. That's not how you don't produce thankfulness by trying. Thankfulness comes when you look at what God is doing in your life and you can see it. It's to recognize that you've been so blind by not seeing it. It's fascinating. One commentator says, Thanksgiving is really the product of careful cultivation. Listen to this. It is the fruit of a deliberate resolve to think about God, ourselves, and our privileges and responsibilities. Man, thankfulness, you hear that? It's the fruit of a deliberate resolve to think about God, ourselves, and our privileges and responsibilities. And then he says, we give testimony to the fact that material things do not dictate the horizons of our soul. And that leads to the second thing I believe we can learn from David's thankfulness. And that is that we can be thankful even if we own nothing. Look at where David is sitting as he writes Psalm 34. If you look at 1 Samuel 22, verse 1, it says, David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. What's fascinating, in verse 6, David says, in Psalm 34, he says, this poor man called and the Lord heard him. And that is not poetry. I mean, it is poetry, but it's not simply fancy words. No, David was extremely poor in this instance. David is sitting in a dark cave, surrounded by enemies who want to pursue his life. He has no refuge, probably no food, until his parents showed up and later. And yet here he is rejoicing in a cave. He must have seemed like a madman. Talk about true insanity, or not. Ironically, Saul is insane and trying to act sane. David acted insane, yet is the most sane person that has ever lived. Or maybe that's extreme, but David's completely sane, but in a way that I think we struggle to be. How is David thankful in the midst of so little? Well, in Psalm 34, if we look at verse 18 through 19, it's very curious what David says. He said, the righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. He protects all his bones, not one of them will be broken. And so, it seems obvious here that thankfulness is not just for when the harvest is full, but also when the harvest fails. And I think some of us today feel that. Some of us live in a harvest is failing scenario. How can we be thankful if we've been diagnosed with cancer again? How can we be thankful if we live with chronic pain? How can we be thankful when we live with an eviction notice and rent is so high? How can we be thankful when we live month to month, when our immigration status is uncertain? The truth is, it's when we have nothing and this is David. David is looking at a situation and he's saying, listen, God is so big to me that even though I have nothing, my thankfulness can still be real. And perhaps we think, well, okay, that's a little unrealistic. One commentator said it this way. He said, the fear of the Lord is indeed the foundation of life, the key to joy in life and long and happy days. But it is not a guarantee that life will always be easy. Devoid of the difficulties that seem to mar so much of human existence. And I think the truth that David is remembering at this particular moment is he's remembering what God is going to do for him and has done for him. It's not just that God gives us wealth. It's not just that God gives us enough to eat. God gives us what no one else can. God can give us eternity in heaven where we never lack again. He can give us salvation from the pain of this life. His perfect love and comfort which never fails. And more than anything, God's not impervious to our pain. He gave his own son and endured the pain of giving a son for our salvation. And the truth is that a new TV or a house cannot compare to that. more profit for your business or a career promotion. That's so small compared to what God is in our lives. Oh, okay. Some of us are still skeptical. You get that? How could I be thankful if I lived in the cave of Adullam with nothing? I don't have anything right now, and I'm not very thankful. What I want is for my cancer to be taken away. And I can understand how we would want that. And don't think that David didn't want his pursuit to end and to be rescued from the enemies who pursued him. Of course he wanted that deeply. But what's fascinating is what David says in verse 8. He doesn't just challenge us to change our minds. He says something fascinating. You ever read verse 8? This is our second point. He says, look, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. And then listen, the lions, and this is a word for young lion, may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. So the most powerful animal in the wild sometimes doesn't have enough to eat. But those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. See, David's not, preaching confrontationally right in your face. He's sort of saying, okay, all right, I know some of you are a little skeptical that the Lord delivered me. Even in the cave of Adullam. He says, just consider. Don't reject what I have to say out of hand. You know what? Taste. Hey, why do we taste a dish? When someone puts a dish in front of us, we taste a bit to see how good it is, to see whether the food is worth trying again. We taste the dish to see if we would want to eat the rest of the dish. And David is saying, do the same with God. If you don't think he would provide, even in nothing, at your wit's end, taste. Just try him. Reach out in prayer. Ask for something in faith. Ask him for love or for his presence. Ask him for the ability to forgive. Ask him for faith. Ask him for comfort. Or go to church. See what it's like. Reach out to a Christian friend. Be vulnerable with them. Share what's going on in your life and see if there's comfort there. Call your pastor. Taste. And just see. And what's fascinating is David says, if you taste, God will not let you down. And he says, look, verses 11 through 14. He says, come, my children. Come, my children. Come, little ones. Listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. And there's a bit more. Live God's way for a while and see how it goes. See what he does. You will find that if you do, God will taste good. And if you reach out to him, you will find, in fact, that he tastes delicious. And if you still don't believe that, just think about the alternative. The alternative is to live without God, which means you are truly alone. The alternative is to think that God doesn't care about you. It's to think that the world has better answers than God. Let me tell you, that alternative will taste bitter. In fact, you know that because many of you have already tasted it. David is saying, stop. Taste what's truly good. Taste God. Look at who God is, he says. Verse 15, he goes on. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. His ears are attentive to their cry. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And then verse 17. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. In verse 18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. David says, God has done that for me. And we, look, the whole book of 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, we read about again and again about how God delivers David and is near to him. This isn't just, David's not speaking out of both sides of his mouth. He's saying, brothers and sisters, God is absolutely this good, and he's been this good to me. And I think many of us in this church can echo that. And for those of us who doubt whether God is really that good, talk to your brothers and sisters. Many of them will have stories they can tell you. Certainly I do. In fact, one of the best parts of the story God is writing in our lives is right now, the fact that we've gathered together as one body to worship him and to be there for each other. That wouldn't happen in only a human world. So once again, brothers and sisters, we reach the great truth of Romans 8. One of the points David is making is that nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing can stop him from delivering us if it's his will to do so. And in fact, he's delivered us in a way that's well beyond delivering David out of Achish. When David speaks about deliverance, he's speaking about something far greater than himself. God will deliver the brokenhearted, and he has. God sent his son. God broke the heart of his son to save the brokenhearted and be near to us. Jesus came to deliver every one of us from our sin. And not one of his bones was broken. You see the prophecy? Yet his hands were nailed to the wood for your sake. And that happened. And by sending Jesus to deliver us from the ravages of sin, Satan, pain, suffering, evil, God gave you a deliverance that will last forever. Is God really as good as he says he is? Well, he offers you eternal life with himself. And, there's nothing, you have to believe that. And the proof of it is massive in what God has revealed about himself. And if God has delivered you from the pain of this world into an eternity, man, that's good. Real good. And that will still be good, even if I'm sitting in the cave of Adullam with nothing, or at the other end of a cancer diagnosis. In fact, what better news could I possibly have when I'm diagnosed with cancer than this? And it is good news. And it leads David to sing. To sing the first 3 verses. Verses that, by the way, we will echo in heaven. Look what he says. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. The afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. And we've read in other parts of the Bible similar refrains that the angels sing in heaven. And if David is given the words of angels to sing in the midst of his circumstances, then so can we. How could we not overflow in thankfulness given what our God has done for us? How could we not look at everything we have as an even greater and abundant gift on top of the gift of knowing God? Because God is not actually satisfied. For most of us, or nearly all of us, he gives us even more than himself. He gives us the gifts of prosperity on top of who he is and what he's offered. So brothers and sisters, let us praise the holy name of God today because of what he's done for us, and be thankful and be filled with thankfulness as a way of life. How could we not, given what God has done? So let us turn to him and praise his name together. Amen.